So the African Nations Championship kicks off in Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda. And ever since it started in 2009, the African Nations Championship has sort of split fans in two. On one end, they are appreciative and feel that this tournament is a great way to show those who have been normally underappreciated by the glamour and the attention of the main Cup of Nations, and a chance for those underappreciated to give them a chance to shine. While for others, they feel the tournament is an unnecessary exercise, proves nothing, and at the end, nothing is really gained or lost. So I wonder, what is on both sides of the argument? What are the pros and the cons of this competition, historically and to an extent today? Hi, I'm Football Otaku and welcome to my latest video, and in this video I will be discussing the African Nations Championship. I sadly won't be giving a breakdown of the competition, who's in, who's not, who's hot, who's not, but I will rather be discussing the competitions. It's in some cases giving some light history to it, and also I will be discussing, is this tournament good or bad for African football? If you guys are, of course, liking the content, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, all that other wonderful stuff. And as the new season is thing, of course, the content here will be all the way ramped up. I mean, I think preseason now is in the books, and now it's time for the real football to start. So let's get started. Starting with, now, for those uninitiated who are wondering, what is CHAN? What is the African Nations Championship, and how different is it from the Africa Cup of Nations? Well, CHAN was a tournament that was started in 2009. It was an initiative by then President, the late Issa Hayatou, for a new tournament, a new national team tournament. But unlike its bigger and more famous brother, the Africa Cup of Nations, the Nations Championship can only feature players playing in the domestic league, which means all the national teams playing in this competition are all playing players based in the local leagues. That means you cannot pick any foreign-based players, you cannot pick anyone playing outside of the country, you have to pick your team from your league. And this has created a few very different sort of ways to handle this competition from some countries. Some countries will give these players the full national team treatment, I mean handing out caps, being coached by the actual national team coach, while for others, they sort of give it a B-team approach, where teams will have their own specific coaches for the Nations Championship. Although they will be playing, they don't necessarily earn caps, which I don't know how that works. But for some, they don't really see the tournament as a necessity. So I will be going into the pros and the cons of why the Nations Championship is what it is, what should be done, etc. and etc. And I'll start first with the pros, starting with the first pro will be it finally shines a light on the underappreciated. I mean, like I said with the Africa Cup of Nations, the Nations Championship really shines a light to those who, under any normal circumstances, wouldn't really be considered for national team selection. If you look at any of the sort of major teams that go to the Africa Cup of Nations, they're mainly filled with stars playing abroad, whether it be in Europe or even in Asia, or even playing abroad on the continent. They're usually filled up with stars from those environments, or simply dual nationals, players who were, of course, born in foreign countries and came home to represent the local national team. So, of course, that makes up a lot of the major national teams, and very few locally based players make the squad anyway. Of course, in some countries, there is a pretty big exception. I mean, South Africa were a huge exception at the last Africa Cup of Nations, where most teams only had 1, 2, if not any players playing in the local league. We instead only had 3 players playing abroad, and everyone else was local. So that was a very, very unique situation. But for most national teams, they mainly pick their players from abroad. So if you're playing in the local league, especially if you're a local playing in the local league, you will naturally not get a lot of national team opportunities. This is where the Nations Championship comes in. because with the rule and stipulation that you can only pick players playing in the local league, it means now that you have an opportunity to play. You finally now can fulfill your dream, I could say, in playing in the national team and playing in an international competition, a competition that you would have never hoped you'd play for if in the Africa Cup of Nations. So it gives a spot to those who are very underappreciated, those who wouldn't normally get the space to play in such a competition. Now they finally have that chance in playing the Nations Championship. So it does breed new ground and a new talent, and also gives the main national team coach a few more players to think about. I mean, there are a lot of great players who have come across from the Nations Championship and have actually gone into pretty great careers. I mean, the MVP of the 2016 tournament, the tournament was won by the DRC, Meshach Elia, he broke in through the Nations Championship, and now he has played several caps for the DRC and has played at an Africa Cup of Nations and has now had a thriving career abroad, mainly with young boys of Switzerland. Another example is Yves Bissouma, the Tottenham Hotspur star. His first major exposure into international tournament football was through that very same tournament, the 2016 Nations Championship in Rwanda. So it does give even Wayoub El-Kati, a star who was part of Morocco's winning team in 2018, they were able to, he was the top star of the tournament. I think he broke the tournament record with 9 goals at that Nations Championship, and now he's become a bit of a star abroad, playing for the likes of Olympiacos. So it does give a lot of chances and a lot of opportunities for players who either, one, have never played national team football before, would never normally play national team football, or for players to be scouted, for players to move on to bigger and better things, because, you never know who's watching a competition like this. So it does open the door for a lot of those players. Another pro, I would say, and probably it's an extension of the first pro, but I would say it's greater exposure for certain countries and for certain sorts of teams that wouldn't normally play in the mainstream Africa Cup of Nations. If you look at certain countries, with the Nations Championship and the changing dynamic, there will of course be bigger countries that will normally would be playing in the bigger leagues, or be playing, it will be rather the favorites. But for the Nations Championship, the dynamic sort of changes. The dynamic is very, very different. The dynamic turns to the fact that in the Nations Championship, a lot of the sort of bigger nations don't really live up to the hype, of course, because they don't really have a strong league to fall back on, because they mainly rely on foreign talent, and it's not very common that they have strong locally based national teams. I think a great example would be Nigeria, and even to an extent defending champion Senegal, who, although have strong national teams at senior level, when it comes to the Nations Championship, they don't really have the best league. They don't really have a league where they're regular participants in CAF club competition, or really make an impact in CAF club competitions. And that also now changed the dynamic, where a lot of smaller countries who aren't really the big players in mainstream international football, they instead now become sort of better in the context of in the Nations Championship, in terms of, because they have the spaces there, those spaces where teams will qualify for the Nations Championship. Also, it helps that the Nations Championship qualifying is very regional, rather than the traditional AFCON qualifying where everyone plays everyone regardless of region. The Nations Championship qualification is very regional. You mainly play teams from your own region, so of course there'll be a lot more spaces for teams from underprivileged regions to qualify, and thus it gives a lot of exposure to smaller countries to finally play in the Cup of Nations. I'll use an example, the Republic of Congo. the Republic of Congo haven't played a Cup of Nations since Equatorial Guinea 2015. Yet they have been very regular participants. The Diable Rouge, the Red Devils, have been regular participants at the Nations Championship, even making the knockout stages once. So that shows that there's a lot greater exposure and a lot greater opportunities for those teams and for those countries to play in a tournament like this. And again, you never know who's watching a tournament like the Nations Championship. You never know. So those chances that you could get swooped up by a big name club who have big opportunities will always be there for you, especially in competitions like this. But sadly, the Nations Championship also has its cons, and one of those cons will generally be a lack of interest from the big teams, from the big countries. I mean, the Nations Championship has produced a lot of, pretty important winners. The likes of the DRC, Tunisia have won titles in the competition before, and now recently Senegal. But generally, the giants of the African game don't look very interested. I mean, one of the most infamous situations is Egypt. I mean, Egypt are the most successful nation in the history of CAF club competition, especially in the CAF Champions League. Al Ahly, Zamalek, Ismaili, and now Pyramids are the four teams who've won the African Club Championship. No other country can boast more variety of winners. And they are considered giants in African football. Their national team are 7 times African champion. That's something, again, a record in the competition. But they generally don't have much of an appetite for the Nations Championship. I mean, to the extent that Egypt have some cases even boycotted the tournament and have refused to enter. I mean, CAF had to literally shoehorn them into the qualifiers and beg for them to participate, which they did, and they failed to qualify. Similar case would be with South Africa, where our league is pretty strong, where our teams have performed pretty well in CAF club competition, but when it's Nations Championship time, we didn't even enter this competition. As crazy as it sounds, we didn't even bother participating. We didn't even enter, and again, CAF had to essentially beg and shoehorn us into the competition. Now here we are in the finals in Pamoja. So there also lies a problem that it's hard to sort of entice the major teams or the major countries to participate. And one of those problems is, for some of those major countries, they don't really have a strong domestic league, or they don't have a domestic league that is pretty competitive in African football, like the likes of Ghana, although they made the final once. Ghana, Nigeria, certain places where the league isn't very strong, especially in African football. And also the schedule doesn't help as well, as qualifiers for the Nations Championship are played outside of the traditional FIFA internationals, and this means that teams are not obliged to release their best players. So it's very common that for the top teams, they lock down those guys and say, you're not going. I mean, even now, the fact that this tournament is taking place literally at the start of the campaign for many countries is a very, very difficult situation, I'm sure, for some countries and for some entries into the Nations Championship, knowing that they are now playing in this competition rather than playing in the local league, which now is starting. I mean, in South Africa, the PSL starts, as per time of recording, this weekend. So that could also deter teams from a lack of appetite and a lack of sort of hunger for this championship. And even if they win it at the end, it feels like even if you don't win in the end, for the winners, of course, it'll be something that's memorable, but it'll feel a bit like a footnote, But for those who don't win, it's not the end of the world. It's not really going to hurt. It's not going to be like getting knocked out of the Cup of Nations or failing to qualify for the World Cup, where it generally feels like the end of the world. Here, we'll just keep it pushing, So that's probably one problem. Another con I mentioned this earlier, but I'll try to go into it a little bit deeper, is the schedule. I mean, the Nations Championship has always had a pretty weird schedule. I mean, the Nations Championship has been pretty inconsistent, even in terms of its broadcasting has been pretty inconsistent. I remember watching the 2016 tournament live on TV. the 2018 tournament on TV, and then I couldn't watch the 2023 tournament that took place in Cameroon, or the 21 tournament, I beg your pardon, in Cameroon, because it wasn't on TV. And then I couldn't watch the last edition on TV. Well, I could watch the last edition on TV as well. But another thing is the scheduling. I mean, the Nations Championship has been played in very sort of weird schedules. I mean, we've had tournaments where it's been played in January, such as the last time out in Algeria, such as even in 2016 in Rwanda. But we're having this tournament, we're playing it in August, I mean, which is again near the start of the football calendar. I mean, this football season is starting. As per time of recording, tomorrow is literally the draw for the CAF Champions League qualifiers. So there's already so much going on in the club game, and having an international tournament, especially an international tournament that relies on locally based players, having it here and now, it doesn't really help. You know, it doesn't really help a lot of teams. It doesn't really help a lot of teams in terms of planning in this tournament. Also, as well, the qualifiers. I mean, the qualifiers, usually for qualifiers like for AFCONs and World Cups, they're usually played during the FIFA international period. So you're obliged to release your best guys. For the Nations Championship, these qualifiers take place literally during the campaign, during the season, and not during FIFA international time. So if it's not during the internationals, teams are not required to release their best players, and that immediately locks them down. So immediately you'll have teams sort of scrounging teams together to play these qualifiers. I mean, I remember South Africa quite infamously, we used to pick players from the second division, not even players from the PSL, players from the second division to make up the national setup to play in this Nations Championship. So that already has so many big difficulties. Egypt have had to do the same thing as well. Very rarely do you get the cream of the crop, the best teams, the best players playing in this competition, and that already is a big knock-on effect to the fans, because if you're not offering the best product, if you're not offering the best players, is it even worth watching? If the teams are really that invested, is it really even worth watching? I mean, we kind of learned that the hard way in June and July in America. So I feel that it's a problem that is definitely going to need to be looked at, but it's a problem I feel that with so much football already going on the continent, it's going to be a difficult problem to solve, if not solvable at all. So where to from here? I mean, some fans have suggested that the Nations Championship should be made into, or have an age gap or age cap where it's under 23s, that you cannot have older or elderly players at the competition, which is fine. I mean, that's a good enough solution. But others have felt that they should scrap the tournaments in general and make the idea of a CAF Nations League. Now, the Nations League is a concept that has been pretty successful, widely successful in Europe and pretty successful in North America. Asia are even considering as well starting their own Nations League. Now, the idea of a CAF Nations League is a cool idea. I mean, having the best of the best, having equal matches or teams of equal ability play each other in matches of consequence. It's just a great idea. But I feel with the amount of football we have here in Africa, that will not really be feasible. I mean, unlike in Europe where the Euros are once every 4 years, the Cup of Nations here is once every 2 years, and at times feels like the Africa Cup of Nations is every year, because if we're not playing the Cup of Nations, we're trying to qualify for it. So unlike also the CONCACAF Gold Cup, which doesn't really have qualifiers like that. I mean, the USA, Mexico, a lot of the big boys of CONCACAF will always be at the Gold Cup anyway. It'll be the more smaller, minute nations that play each other in the qualifiers. Here in Africa, our Cup of Nations qualifying is vast. Everyone plays. Even if you're defending champions, even if you're the host nation, everyone plays the qualifiers. So that means everyone is playing everyone at any given time. So there's already so much chock-a-block into our schedule, because we're either qualifying for the World Cup or qualifying for the Cup of Nations, or even qualifying for both tournaments at the same time. It's going to be so difficult to squeeze in a third national team competition, especially one that demands us releasing our best players and playing the best of the best of the best. So I feel like CAF Nations League will be a great idea, but I don't think it'll really be feasible, which is why I feel the Nations Championship has to work, because there is no other alternative. I feel like the Nations Championship, for all of its problems, for all of its cons, is also a very unique idea. No other continent has a competition like this where you are only allowed to pick your local players. I mean, don't get me wrong, other continent federations do have secondary competitions, or in those secondary competitions you can literally play whoever you want. This is the only competition on the planet where only locally based players are allowed to play as per the rulebook. So I feel the Nations Championship can be improved, it can be made better, and I feel it has to work because we have no other alternative. Any other sort of alternative or any other sort of innovation won't really work or won't really stick, or a lot of it has to change for it to go through, and CAF will have to let a lot of stuff go, and I don't see CAF letting a lot of that stuff go in order for other competitions to see the green light. So in my opinion, I feel for all its problems, for all its cons, for all its inconveniences, the Nation Championship is here to stay. It can be made better, and I would much rather have the Nations Championship, even though I have a few discrepancies as well with the competition. I would much rather have the Nations Championship stay than we have something else replacing it. And that's it. That's my video on the African Nations Championship. Please tell me in the comments, are you watching the African Nations Championship? Is your country in the competition? What are your expectations? How's the tournament been so far? Are you enjoying it? Are you not enjoying it? And who do you think will be going all the way and claiming the title? Anyway, your feedback is always welcome. Don't forget again to like, to share, subscribe. And it's been your boy, the Football Otaku, and never forget, real football always wins. Check you on the flip side. Bye bye. Deuces.